Fisheries Division JICA FAD setting video. If you enjoy this video and learn how to safely set the FAD, you will enjoy catching this kind of the fish. Definition of FADs: man-made structures designed to float on or near the surface of the water to attract fish and facilitate their capture. The video overview. We have a main part 4 sections for this video. Number 1, site selection. Number 2, how to choose material. Number 3, how to set FAD. Number 4, FAD making and setting video safely. If you are successfully learning this video, the construction of FAD and safety setting, your result will be like this Dominica FAD fisher.
Before FAD is constructed, one of the most important aspects is the selection site for this FAD. And we have to take 2 things into consideration. Is the site selection, there are several things we need to consider, and 2, the selection position on the chart. Part 1, considerations for site selection. Step 1, site selection. We have migratory area, current, bottom type, and depth are all very important things we need to check. Many fishers by experience already know the migration area and already have knowledge on the current. However, we need modern equipment and charts to give us indication of the bottom types and depth. Communication with our local authority is of most importance because different islands may have different fisheries regulations. For example, on the island of Dominica, the National Association of Fishermen Cooperative, NAFCOP, has the management authority for FADs. So therefore, no private fisherman is allowed to set any FAD other than the National Association of Fishermen. For example, like St. Lucia, the Fisheries Department of St. Lucia has the absolute authority to set FADs and no private fisherman can. So before the individual fisherman decides to set a FAD, he should check with his local authority to see what the status and legality of his actions are. Step 2, the fisherman or organization must have knowledge of the shipping lanes, as this is a frequent cause of loss of FAD throughout the islands. And step 2, steep slope areas also can be determined by the use of charts and the modern equipment. Very importantly, checking the depth. Again, step 1, 2, and 3 all must be done by checking modern equipment and charts, as these things are not easily known by just experience. When all of these steps have been taken into consideration for the site selection, we could now move to the construction of the FAD. Here we can see an example of what the selection process on the chart looks like. This is an example of an electronic chart generated from a navigation software. By using this chart or software, we can together find the GPS coordinate of the intended area, the depths of water, topographic condition, and also distance from shore and distance from other FADs. For FAD setting position should be confirmed before construction. Part 2, how to choose the materials. Number 1, buoyancy and sinking force. Number 2, depth and rope length. Number 3, buoy. 4, anchor. 5, mooring rope. 6, the appendage or attraction device. Here is a typical example of a FAD which is commonly used in any of the 4 main islands which are advancedly using FADs, such as Dominica, Martinique, Guadeloupe, and St. Lucia. This typical design is both cost-effective, economical, and efficient. To begin with, there are 3 main components of a FAD: the head, the main rope, and the anchor. This typical FAD, as you can see, contains very importantly a radar reflector, a flag which is used as a marker, and also importantly a beacon light which is visible at night to fishers and other vessels traversing the waters of this area. Here we can see these are extra surface attractions for such species such as wahoo and dolphin fish. This FAD contains of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 surface buoys, 5 of which are hard plastic buoys which are of pressure types which can sustain pressures up to 300 meters, and 1 inflatable buoy, the biggest of which can sustain a buoyancy of up to about 80 kilograms. In recent times, the inflatable buoy has become very important because of its high buoyancy, which will enable us to eliminate a number of smaller buoys, reducing the amount of rope which is on the surface of the water. Each joining area sometimes contains a galvanized swivel. Most times these swivels are the size of ½ inch. Most in the anchor area, this swivel is a bit bigger, mostly 5/8. The rope which makes up the head, most times we advise that this rope is doubled because of the extra pressures of current and the risk of this rope being on the surface being overrun by ships and other fat fishing vessels. So by doubling the rope, we improve the chances of cutting or the possibility that both ropes will not be cut and will have enough time to save this fat. The main rope, most preferably, is the size of 10 millimeters or up. We suggest 10 millimeters or more because of the excessive current which we get at these depths. And small ropes which are often used by fishermen, such as 8 millimeter, is not recommended. Our anchor in this circumstance is 2 half drums. The total of a 45-gallon concrete drum, or US 55-gallon, is cut in 2 and filled with concrete. The purpose of cutting this drum in 2 is because of the small vessels, most small vessels of the Caribbean islands cannot accommodate at one time 1 large concrete drums. So it makes it a lot easier for fishermen to maneuver 2 half drums instead of a full concrete drum. These here are appendages, or most fishers consider to as the attraction device, which are mostly set sometimes between 30 and 60 meters depth from the surface. And fishers may choose to include 3 to 6 of these appendages, or sometimes the fisher's own initiative as much as he wishes. Buoyancy and sinking force. This is very vital and critical to the survival of the FAD, because the relationship between the surface buoys, which is on the head, and the anchor is of paramount importance. Please note that the anchor should be 2 times the weight of the buoy. 2 times the weight of the buoy, or else what will happen is your surface buoy or head will float your anchor away into alternative positions, and then when you return you will not be able to find this FAD. Further on we will explain this a little further. Here we can see a direct relationship between the depth of the rope, the depth and the length of rope. Before actual construction is done, the fisher organization must know his depth in order to calculate the length of his rope during construction. In most circumstances and through experiment, we have come to the conclusion that 1.5 times the depth is the most suitable calculation. The components of the FAD: hard plastic buoys, soft sponge, or which is better known as bullet buoys, polyvinyl chloride, this is another type of buoy, styrofoam, inflatable buoys, and even local materials such as bamboo. All of these are different types of buoys which are used for FAD construction. Here you can see an example of high pressure buoys which was recently being used under the FAD pilot project, under the regional master plan project between JICA and CRFM, which was experimented in Dominica and St. Lucia in an effort to modify the existing FAD to make it more cost-effective, durable. These buoys were placed about, through the experimental stage, 200 meters from the surface of the water, and we expect this to help the head of the FAD with excessive current, and so far the reviews that we have experienced has been very positive. However, these buoys are not easily accessible and can be very costly, so this is why currently they are only being used in an experimental stage. Here is another example of a typical easily attained buoy called bullet buoys. Most times these buoys are being used for FAD fishing. However, some fishers have used them to deploy FADs, and we have come to the conclusion that it's not advisable to use these buoys on FADs, as when they are submerged they can be easily shrinked and therefore lose their force of buoyancy. Again, here is an example of inflatable buoys. Currently, the size which are being used under the FAD pilot project are the A3 and the A4 types, which contains as much as 80 kilograms of buoyancy. And with this type of buoy, it eliminates the number of hard plastic buoys you have to deploy, making the surface head much shorter than before, avoiding cutting from ships and other passing vessels. Natural materials. Before the use of buoys, fishers set FADs using natural materials such as floating woods, and most typically in areas such as Trinidad and Tobago, where you have the shallow water FADs, we have the bamboo floats. While these may have died off over the time, however, these natural materials are very important for the attraction of the pelagic species such as dolphin fish and wow. The anchor section. In most of the islands, fishers mostly use whatever they can find. However, the two most easily attained material and choice of anchors have been the concrete barrel or drum, the engine block, and however, again on the regional master plan project or the FAD pilot project in Dominica and St. Lucia, we have been experimenting with the use of sandbags. And many fishers display their skepticism about the use of sandbags. However, this is an experimental stage, and these sandbags have been used by the Japanese fishermen for decades. So we now are experimenting with these sandbags, and they have been deployed for over 1 year now in the waters of Dominica and St. Lucia, and still these FADs currently exist. That means these bags are working. However, for fishermen who are just beginning organization to set FADs, the bags in these circumstances are special bags which are now currently only found in Japan. So we do not advise fishers to use the ordinary bags such as flour bags or sugar bags to be used as an anchor bag, because their physical structure is not as strong as the bags used under the experiment. Again, you can see 3 pictures of anchors being used. This is the concrete drums are the most commonly used in Dominica, followed by the engine blocks, and this is the sandbags used for the experimental purposes under the FAD pilot project between JICA and CRFM. Most times engine blocks are not easy to find and easy to maneuver. However, the concrete drums are the most first choice. Mooring rope. Here we can see 2 of the most commonly used mooring rope in FAD construction, which is the polypropylene and the polyethylene. Both of them with a positive buoyancy. So you can see the specific gravity with less than 1, so that means it floats on water. The polypropylene is the most heavily used because of its cost. Again, one typical fundamental thing about the FAD is that it must be cost effective. So fishers prefer to use a cheaper material, which is the polypropylene. However, during the FAD pilot project, we endeavored to use a much stronger material, which in these circumstances was the polysteel. But for most circumstances in the region, this type of rope is not easily accessible, and the polypropylene still remains the favorite choice of the fisher. Sinking ropes also, we have nylon. Again, you can see with a greater specific gravity than 1, therefore it sinks. This rope is very expensive, so it becomes very attainable to fishermen and not economical. But in most circumstances, nylon would be the most preferred, but because of its cost, it's not easily attained. And streaming straps, which are locally found at the cement factories. In this picture, we can easily see an example of a handmade sinker, and I will explain the use of this sinker later on. Here is just 2 charts showing the different properties of some of the ropes which are commonly used, such as nylon and polysteel ropes, and which indicates the tensile strength or how strong these ropes are. A very important aspect of the FAD, which is the appendage, or as I said, the attraction device. The 3 main types of attractions being used are the main one, which is the tarpaulin, as I mentioned, attached between 30 to 60 meters of water. Old nets, which are usually tied at the surface for attraction of dolphin, fish, wahoo, and other surface pelagics. And usually, sometimes, in some circumstances, old ropes also at the surface. Once all the appropriate steps are taken or considerations for construction, this should be a typical example of what a cost-effective and efficient FAD looks like. Very simple, which can be done by fishers themselves or organizations once they follow these steps. Basic, very important, again I will mention the radar reflector, beacon light, flag for fishers who are traveling in daytime, lights for vessels who are traveling at nighttime to avoid cutting your FADs. As I mentioned, the importance of swivel, your surface attractions, inflatable buoy, at least one if possible, your pressure buoys, attraction devices, anchor. The length of your mooring rope will determine upon the depth of your selection area. So once everything is done properly, a perfect FAD should look like this.
3 years.
And for maximum use, a good FAD should last 3 years plus. This is what we consider to be a perfect construction. Part 3, how to set FAD. Many times fishers invest, organizations or fisheries departments, a lot of money into the construction process of the FAD, only to find out that the day you go to set, all of this hard work and investment is lost immediately in a twinkle of an eye because we missed a few steps in the actual deployment. So to avoid this embarrassment or disappointment and to safeguard our investment, we must please take proper precaution to set FAD properly. So part 3 tells us of how to set the FAD. First of all, in everything we do, safety is of paramount. Safety at sea for FAD setting. Number 2, FAD setting safety. So we are talking about two safeties here. Safety while being at sea and the safety of the FAD itself. And 3, after all of this is done, we do final check before we leave the deployment area and return to shore. 1, safety at sea for FAD setting. Good preparation is the key for safety. What does that mean? This will depend on what type of anchor is being used. Will determine what safety feature we do. Is it a concrete drum? Is it sandbags? Is it engine block? What type of boat are we using? Is it a large vessel with a large open hull? Is it a small 20-foot fishing boat? Different countries have different types of boat. So this we have to take into consideration. How many fishers are required? Does this boat have a crane? So you don't need many persons. A crane can deploy anchor. Do we need manpower? How heavy is the anchor will determine how many fishers. Because most times these anchors need to be deployed very quickly, or else you can run into problems. As I say again, example, is it a concrete drum? 300 kilograms. For this type, you're going to need some serious manpower. Or is it artisanal fishing boat, where you would deploy 2 boats for operation, one carrying only the anchor, the other carrying the head. On the physical aspects, the weather is of critical importance because most FADs are being deployed offshore and anchors can be very heavy in a small boat. For example, in countries like Dominica, St. Lucia, where the average fishing boat is about 20 to 25 feet. Weather condition is of paramount because the vessel which carries the anchor, they can move very slow. So we further need to have good communication between the fishers and the boats. Why? Because in most circumstances, FAD operation or deployment operations are a 2-boat operation. As I mentioned before, 1 boat carrying the anchor, 1 boat carrying the head. They need to have proper communication so that the boat with the anchor do not deploy while portions of the head are still attached to the other boat. And the third point is the check of the direction, the current direction and strength. Further, we will explain that, but this is very critical. FAD setting, as I mentioned before, we have our current direction, shooting direction, FAD setting position. This diagram clearly indicates the operation we are supposed to take. Always the FAD is set against the current in all circumstances, and the FAD again is set towards our original FAD deployment area, the site which was selected. Fishers must take several things into consideration: how far away they go from the setting area based on the length of rope that they intend to deploy. Again, this diagram shows a further illustration of the direction of the vessel. Two critical important points: shooting head first. Again, there is always differences among fishers. In Dominica, there are some fishers who like to set some of the head and then deploy the anchor with the rest of the rope on board. But this is an advice that I never give. And to all fishers, we would always propose that you shoot the entire head first and never from the anchor area, as this is this could be very dangerous and also cause. We will fix this. As this type of action could be very dangerous and not encouraged. Again, I will mention always set against the current. To see our FAD setting operation, as you can see here, continuous shooting. The head against the current. For 2D of FAD setting. 1. Set the head and rope prior to drop anchor. So here is a diagram of all the rope being set. The last is the anchor. Okay? But before this anchor is dropped, make sure all rope are clear and keep yourself safe. The main reason for setting against the current is so that it will enable us and help us to stretch this rope. Safety tips. Again, during shooting of mooring area, make sure there is no entanglement, no kink. Even one weak point kills the FAD easily. As I mentioned, to construct a FAD takes a lot of investment, time, and effort. At the last end of deploying this anchor, we want to make sure that everything is okay before we go to this final point of deployment of anchor. Also, there are a few things we also need to consider. Check the balance of the boat. As I mentioned, in the small islands, we have small boats, and these concrete jumps can be very easily. So we need to make sure that they are evenly placed during the deployment. Confirmation that all rope is clearly out of the boat, so that no rope gets snagged onto the boat, so when the anchor is dropped, we lose everything. Again, through experience, in the early days, we have had a few mishaps with FAD deployment, and which have also resulted in loss of investment, no loss of life, but loss of investments of fishing boat through this simple mistake. The paramount always for construction, deployment, and all aspects of FADs is to always be safe. So, final check. After the anchors have been deployed and you are satisfied that it has reached bottom, there are several things that we need to do. You do not have to feel comfortable and say, okay, the FAD is set, it's time to go back to shore. It is critical to return to the head of the FAD to start inspections and to make sure that all buoys are steadily floating and they are not tangled. If there's an entanglement, you should take your time to remove this entanglement and to inspect the appendages and any extra rope left floating. This is very critical, and we have to tie on, there are several local materials, weights onto these ropes, because as I explained earlier, these ropes are buoyant, and if left floating on the water, they can easily be caught by other fishing vessels or merchant vessels. So weights have to be attached to these different portions of these ropes. You can use local materials such as rebars, pieces of rebars from construction sites, or you fill small bottles, drink bottles with sand which have appropriate weight, and tie them on at different intervals onto these main rope until they have been completely submerged.
This PowerPoint presentation was made by the Mr. Motoki Fujii and Mr. Juran Defo by the JICA CRFM project, the pilot project for FAD and associated pelagic fishery resource development and management as part of study on formulation of master plan on sustainable use of fishery resource for the coastal community development in the Caribbean. And myself, Mr. Hiro Ishida, I modified that. The part 4. Next video will show us how to make and set the FAD in case of the St. Kitts Navy's workshop done by Dominica Fishery Division and JICA. Please enjoy.